Hey there folks, hope you're all doing good. Welcome back to another Noobert video featuring yours truly. In this one, I'll be going over the topic of 10 awesome ways to train pawns in Rimworld. Training in Rimworld is a pretty vital part of maintaining your colony since it's needed to ensure your pawns have the necessary skills to keep things running. From farming to mining to slaughtering your enemies, you've got to be on the ball. Since that's the case, I'll be dropping some good tips for you guys that will hopefully be helpful in managing the training of your colonists. Note that mod content won't be covered, only stuff from the base game. Before we begin, I'd appreciate it if you could drop this video a like and subscribe to my channel to get loads of other cool content. Done? Alright, let's start. Firstly, let's talk about idleness. Idleness is a big no-no when it comes to training pawns. I'm not talking about racing, mind you, but pawns actually slacking off and just lazing around. In general, you won't want to have pawns doing nothing, since it's a waste of time plus potential resource gathering and training opportunities. Even if you can't find any tasks for them to execute in the base, you can just keep some spare low-level research benches in your base for them to work at. This way, they get some training and also produce items, even if those items are of low quality. Plus, having a variety of pawn skills trained up is useful in case of emergencies. Having a high-level medical skill is important in case your doctor pawn ever needs to treat an injured or diseased colonist. You wouldn't want patients dying at a crucial moment because your doctors suck, right? The good thing about this skill type is that it's pretty straightforward to train. Instead of needing to do loads of work throughout the day, just perform a surgery. Any kind of surgery, including limb amputation, provides a huge XP bonus for completion. Yes, that's right, chopping off limbs in the operating theater counts. What's this for? Oh, well, guess he doesn't need it. Oh, again, it's fine, I've got lots more. In fact, 2 surgery attempts per day is enough to hit the XP soft cap. Just spam surgeries and your doctors will quickly hit level 14. Of course, there are risks involved. Like in real life, people do die or get crippled from botched surgeries. Since that's the case, you'll need a supply of expendable victims. I mean patients. If possible, try to practice surgery on prisoners instead and reserve skilled surgeries in proper environments for your own colonists instead. I'll cover the topic of prisoners more in depth later in this video, so stick around. My third tip for training your pawns well is to play around with zone movement restrictions in order to force colonists into performing specific tasks in certain areas. This isn't a technique specific to training and can also be used to do stuff like herding animals in a specific direction or preventing pawns from wandering into danger. It's definitely worth mastering. How do you go about it then? Here's an example. Let's say we have a colonist named Bob. You want him to focus solely on training his crafting skill for a few days, ignoring everything else except rest, recreation, and food where necessary. To do so, create an allowed zone for Bob with the work area in it, which could be a workshop of sorts. Remember to also allow Bob access to the bathroom, recreation area, and dining table, and food storage so he doesn't drop dead. You know what I mean? Bear in mind, the way zone permissions work, the zones don't need to be connected to each other, and if a pawn has to pass through a restricted zone to reach their destination, they'll do so freely. Bob will move between these zones whenever necessary, but will ignore all workbenches except the ones in his allowed zone. You can leave him alone barring unforeseen circumstances and he'll go about his task. Pretty simple, eh? Like I said, it's worth learning how to restrict and allow zones since you'll be using it a lot during the game. Unless you play a peaceful mode or cheat to avoid hostile encounters, you'll inevitably have to engage in combat sooner or later in Rimworld. Ideally, your pawn should have a minimum level of combat training. Don't focus excessively on it though, since it takes away time from other important tasks. Combat in Rimworld is divided into ranged and melee, with separate skills for each. You'll ideally want to train both since there's no way of knowing what enemies will show up. If you pursue combat training, make sure there's time to spare since it's pretty micromanagement intensive and may take your attention away from other pressing needs. Pawns need to be drafted and you also need to ensure neither your target nor the combat trainee dies, especially in melee combat. The best way to train ranged combat is by hunting. Give your pawn a long range weapon, maybe a bolt action rifle or something, as animals are less likely to enrage and retaliate if shot at from long range. Try to pick resilient animals as targets like megasloths, rhinoceros, or thrumbos. They can give a lot of shooting skill if your pawn kills them slowly with a weak weapon, but be careful not to let them into melee range. If possible, also have another trained shooter nearby to finish off the animal in case your trainee is too exhausted to continue or risk of dying. As for melee training, it's obviously a lot riskier. It's done the same way as range training by hunting an animal, but your pawn is a lot more exposed to damage. In addition to low damage weapon, you'll also need to equip strong armor on the trainee trainee to minimize damage. Even then, they'll probably still get bruises and require a few days of rest. Try not to pick wild animal herds for melee training, as it's likely the colonists will get swarmed. Instead, abuse your domesticated animals. Only the attacked animal will retaliate instead of the herd. And you can also gain medical skill by treating its wounds later, as long as the animal or your trainee doesn't die. Hit them all you want. Yeah, Rimworld is that sort of game. It's pretty messed up. Let's take a quick break. I'm sure you need one. Since we're resting, here's a quick reminder for y'all. If you like this video, don't forget to drop a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. You'll get loads more cool content for Rimworld as well as other games. It's definitely worth it. If you want to support me, you should also subscribe to my Patreon for even more exclusive content like access to the Patreon feed, Discord rules, special credits, and even a mug. Shout out to my list of loyal Patreon subscribers for their continued support. I greatly appreciate it and wouldn't be able to make content like this without you guys. Now let's get back to the video. One interesting quirk of Rimworld's XP system is that, aside from a task difficulty scaling, XP gain is calculated based on time spent during that task. This means you can deliberately sabotage your pawn's training progress by slowing things down in order to maximize EXP gain. Apart from what I mentioned earlier about using weak weapons when hunting, another way of slowing training down is having pawns craft items in harsh conditions, which reduces their working speed. This means stuff like dark rooms, cold weather, or even when the pawn is tired or starving. Of course, you gotta be careful to harm the pawn too much, just enough to maximize the XP gain. A dead slave is useless after all. Speaking of slaves, remember I mentioned keeping spare prisoners as training dummies earlier. Let's go a bit more in depth on that. Like we've learned so far, some training activities require your pawns to hone their skills on either animals or other enemies. You won't always have access to these entities and may find the conditions unsuitable for training. With spare prisoners, there's less need to worry about that. You can use and abuse these prisoners without worrying about your risk for your own colonists, from chopping off their limbs as surgical practice to combat training where they get beaten up, to even socialization training. Yes, socialization training, assuming you've already broken a prisoner's resistance, they'll be willing to socialize with your pawns. Not like they've got much else to do when stuck in a cell anyway, might as well use them to benefit yourself. Want some? By the way, you'll be released soon. Released from life, that is. Another thing to take note of when training pawns is the material costs, especially for crafting. You generally don't want to use expensive material for training crafting, since the low skill of pawns will turn out a crappy product and waste the material. Plus, material quality and rarity has no effect on EXP gain, only selling price, so just let pawns handle the cheap stuff during training. Since that's the case, one material that's pretty useful for training and grinding out EXP is stone. Used primarily in construction and art, stone is worth a lot of experience because of the amount of work it requires. It takes a long time to build with stone, so you can easily get multiple builders to level 20 construction skill with just a single flame of passion. Just have them make all the floors with fine stone tiles and rack up that easy EXP. Alternatively, build wooden chairs. For some reason, chairs take a lot of effort to build in Rimworld. I guess they're made of special alien wood or something. Each chair generates roughly 1,000 progress points, meaning you'll level up fast just from working in a chair factory. We're nearly done with the video, but first another break. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate your feedback in the comments below. You can ask questions, suggest stuff, even just stop by the chat. Don't be shy, just remember though. Feel free to comment now or later when the video is done. Back to work then. Training in Rimworld isn't all about combat or physical research, as research plays a big role in running a colony. The main way to train intellectual skill is by doing research as well as developing drugs and medication. There's no special technique or trick to make developing intellectual skills more efficient, so you've just gotta grind it out. On the upside, you won't have to worry about pawns needing a minimum skill level. All research done is equally valuable, and medicine and drugs have no quality. That means your choice of employee for researching only affects the time spent. Besides, expanding a colony means you'll need to research new technology anyway. Good way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or 1 shotgun if you prefer. Actually, come to think of it, you can kill 3 birds with a single stone while training pawns. The drugs you craft like Wake Up, Flake, and Go Juice can be sold for a good profit. It's worth sticking pawns at a research station whenever possible, so give it a shot maybe. This last point is one I've already touched on briefly throughout the video, but I'll say it again. Keep in mind pawn skill levels when training. Some forms of training, like harvesting plants and crafting, will yield inferior quality products as well as lower amounts when conducted by unskilled pawns. It's not necessarily a major issue if you're prepared for it, but definitely something to be aware of when resources are tight. On the other hand, some skills need specialized training to level up further beyond a certain point. For example, your pawn with high level crafting won't get much out of making basic items, so you should assign advanced stuff to them. That's it for my video on top 10 awesome ways to train pawns in Rimworld. I hope you enjoyed this video and do try to implement these tips in your game whenever possible. Again, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Feel free to drop a comment too. Thank you everybody that helped us make this video, all of our lovely Patreons and editors, and I'll see you guys in the next one.